Jesse helped me get on the
Good evening. May I ask everyone to take your seats, please?
She doesn't have a lot. Temporary. Yeah, it's temporary. It's temporary as a whole. But she has a lot of extra.
Good evening and welcome. I am Denise Best, and on behalf of Hartford Votes, Hartford Voter Coalition, I'd like to welcome you here this evening for the candidate forum for state representative for districts 3 and 5. We are a nonpartisan coalition of 14 organizations and agencies that are listed in your program. The coalition's mission is to increase voter education and engagement in Hartford and help people participate in the democratic process. Tonight's candidate forum is for Democratic candidates for state representative. They will be on the ballot for the August 14th primary. You will meet them in a minute, but also please see tonight's program, which you should already have received when you entered. It's this, for information about them. Just a few things before we get started. I'd like to thank all of the coalition volunteers. I'd like to thank the City of Hartford Registrar of Voters for providing voter registration. And if you need to register, please visit the table in the rear, somewhere back there, to the left. Oh, to the left. And make sure that you register to vote. Recording tonight's forum is accesstv.org. If you get a chance to ask a question later, we need you to please speak into the microphone. If you want to ask a question, you'll need to speak into the microphone. We want to make sure that your question can be heard in the recording. Restrooms are located out the door and to your right, down the hallway, on your right. You should have a feedback form. It's yellow. It looks like this. You should have received one when you entered this evening. Please fill it out and give it to us before you leave. Your feedback is important because it helps us to make future events even better. Please watch for announcements of other coalition candidates' events after the primary leading up to the general election on Tuesday, November 6th. The format for this evening is as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to give an opening statement. The moderator will ask 2 questions of the candidate for District 3 and 2 the candidate for District 5. The first candidate will have 3 minutes to respond. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond. As you see, we have 2 out of the 4 candidates this evening. So we'll have a little adjustment here. The moderator will ask the questions of both candidates, and then the audience will have time to ask questions from 6:40 to 7:25. And again, I'll remind you, you'll have to speak into the mic. We prefer that you don't yell out your questions. The moderator will field questions from the audience directed to District 3 candidates for 15 minutes, and then District 5 candidate for 15 minutes. The moderator will ID the questioner, and volunteers will bring the microphone to the questioner. Candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to any question they wish to answer. From 7:25 to 7:30, we will have closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the following question. If you could have voters remember one thing about you as they enter the voting booth, what would it be? At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator, Bilal Dabir Siku, PhD. He is an associate professor at the political science in Hilliard College at the University of Hartford. And without further ado, Mr. Bilal Siku. Thank you, sir.
Well, good evening. Oh, that wasn't enthusiastic. I'll try that again. Wow. Good evening. Good evening. Well, I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm excited to be a part of this forum, this candidate forum. As was read, we're going to modify this agenda just a little bit because we only have 2 of the candidates here, which means they'll have more opportunity to talk about the issues that are important to you as constituents in their district and to really hear from them about why they believe you should vote for them. And so what I'd like to do now is to start with the opening statements, and I want to invite Gannon up first to give a 2-minute opening statement.
Do this. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for that warm welcome. Thanks to you, Mr. Saku, for moderating. And I'm really excited to share the stage with Representative McGee, working very hard for Hartford. Thank you so much for your work on the state. And thank you guys for also being here. I should really acknowledge a few people before I say anything. This is really my first big microphone. Believe it or not, I'm a first-time candidate. And so I'm used to talking to people one-on-one at the door. So I want to thank my mom, Gloria, who is a Hartford teacher. She's the treasurer of my campaign, and she has made it possible for me to be on this stage in so many ways I can't count. So thank you for making this possible, Mom. Also to my girlfriend, Christina, who's also dealt with a lot in the last few months of getting on the ballot, and to my campaign manager, Jesse, for running everything on time. Thank you for that. And I'm really excited to engage with everybody here. I hope you guys have questions that you want to answer, that you want answers to. I think we'll be able to really get a good conversation going. And this forum, I guess the last but not least folks I should thank is the Hartford Votes Coalition for pulling everybody together and really emphasizing how important voting is. Now, as much as I'm grateful for the registrar, who extremely professional and fair, we got on the ballot. They did a wonderful job. They had a lot of work to do, and they had great leadership getting it done. But representation really goes to the core of everything that we deal with in this city. If we're talking about the issues related to poverty, we need a champion in the legislature who's going to be talking about how those issues affect everyday people, from jobs, economic opportunities, economic justice, racial justice, criminal justice reform, education, affordable and fair housing. All of these issues go to having a champion in the Capitol who is going to fight for the people of Hartford and bring people together. And that's what's at stake in this election. My time is up, so thank you all so much for being here, and thanks. I'm looking forward to this conversation and your questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Brandon.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, all right, a little dry. Thank you for those warm remarks, and I, too, look forward to tonight's conversation. Dr. Bilal, thank you for hosting. All of you, it is an honor to be here. It's been an honor to serve in this capacity for 5.5 years, representing the great city of Hartford and the wonderful town of Windsor. I believe within our Hartford delegation, I'm one that represents a multi-town district as a state representative. And I often tell people it has nothing to do with your zip code. It has everything to do with connecting with your constituents and those who vote you in and can vote you out, but making sure you're advocating on their behalf. Tonight's conversation, I think, is so important when you talk about civic engagement. You talk about the issues like criminal justice reform. And I've had an opportunity to champion many pieces of legislation, not just this past session, but sessions prior to that. And I look forward to working on that. You talk about education reform. Hartford has seen a lot of reform over the years, but we're still in a situation where many of our young people are being left behind. And it's going to take all of us in this room, not just a piece of legislation that we pass will change the direction of our education. It's going to take the minds in this room, your advocacy, your grit, your consistency to help us get some legislation passed. And you know, when you talk about urban issues, you talk about challenges, systemic issues, I'm here to really learn from all of you when we talk about these debates and we talk about issues that have impacted our community. So I look forward to the opportunity. I look forward to debate, but I guess that's not an opportunity, but to really discuss with each of you tonight. It's extremely important that you speak your mind, share your voice, and let's move the conversation forward. Thank you.
So 4 questions were prepared for me to use tonight. And so I'm going to ask those 4 questions of our candidates. Bang it, no. It's our timekeeper, so there's a reason. Got it? Right. All right. Okay. So we have our timekeeper back. So I've got 4 questions I'm going to ask, and I'll ask them one at a time, give you an opportunity to talk, probably give about a 3-minute response to each question. So here is the first question that was generated by the Hartford Voter Coalition. Here in one of the richest states in the Union, Connecticut has one of the largest achievement gaps between rich and poor students and non-white and white students. What role can you and other state representatives play in ensuring that Hartford school children obtain the skills they need to enter the workforce and the social, academic, cultural, and intellectual development they need to become engaged citizens and lead productive lives as adults? Why don't we start with you first, Brandon, and then we'll go together.
Pretty loaded question, but I think it's one that we should always have an opportunity to discuss. As a child of Chef Verse O'Neill, which essentially was the case some 30 years ago that helped to integrate our schools. And I think it's done a great job. I'm a product of Canton High School. I see somebody in the back like, woo, woo, Canton. Came back to Hartford, eventually graduating from Prince Technical Vocational High School. And I'm sharing all this with you because it's important to understand why it is time for us to address the funding of education in many of our school districts. So Chef by itself, we could have 4 hours, discussions on why we think it's good and why we need to improve it. But the question is, what can we as the elected officials continue to do with respect to education, providing opportunities for young people so that they're productive citizens in their communities. We can't have a conversation only about education, okay? When you talk about education, you gotta talk about the quality of life. You have to talk about poverty, the lack of access to resources in many of our communities. You have to talk about the health of our communities and job opportunities in our communities. Where am I going with this? Many of our young people in our urban centers, they're already starting at a deficit. And so as the elected, as the state of Connecticut, we have to take a serious look at how we continue to fund education, but you can't have that conversation without addressing the billions of dollars we spent on Chef V. O'Neill. So there's not a crystal answer to how to fix the system. It's systemic, and it's going to take time. But one of the things that we must do, and I got a minute left, one of the things that we must do is to continue to support organizations that help to educate our parents, our students, our communities around the opportunities to better their children's education. We have to do that. And so, Dr. Bilal, I'm not sure if that's the crystal ball answer, but I'm sure somebody will ask another question to clarify my response. Thank you so much.
So I should say I'm the product of the Hartford Public Schools. I went to Noah Webster, Quirk Middle, and Hartford High. My parents were both teachers in the Hartford Public Schools as well as being parents. And I remember growing up here and really experiencing political leadership that many times divided those groups of people, right? And we've seen the deficit that you're talking about has impacted our school system since before those days and certainly now. I think one of the first things we need to do as far as education is to approach it from a community organizing model and have our political leaders who are seeking to bring people together in the school community rather than dividing them based on whatever their agendas might be. Parents and teachers both want excellent quality education for students in Hartford. And I think that's a good starting place, is getting people who care about that common goal in the room together and communicating with each other. Sounds very simple. It's not something that always happens in our school system. And we have a history of a lot of turnover in positions of leadership, the superintendents, and more with temporary teacher programs all the way down to the classroom level. What I think the really most important thing for us to do is to strengthen neighborhood schools. I think any parent who has an opportunity to get their kid to a great school, we should support that parent. And I certainly talk to a lot of them at doors who don't feel like the neighborhood school is the best opportunity for their child. That's something that we need to address as a community. And in my experience, talking to those parents, as much as they are willing to bus their kid to a school for science and technology in the suburbs or somewhere across the city, there's not one of them who wouldn't prefer a quality public education at their neighborhood school. It's the same type of community that builds attachment. I see a friend of mine in the audience today whose son found out a week before he was going to kindergarten what school he was going to. That is a failure on so many levels of so many people in positions of leadership that little boy didn't have a summer to get excited about going to kindergarten every day as he passed by his new school, and he just didn't know. Getting into college there's a lot of anxiety associated with that year. And now we're putting that stress on kids younger and younger with the lottery system. There's too much turnover. I think we're moving kids around. We're treating them as if they're chairs or boxes of books. And we're not thinking about the long-term school community and the neighborhoods that we're building. A couple of things I think are important too. The underlying issue you're talking about, inequality. There's nowhere other than our school system where the ravages of inequality are more apparent. And we have one of the most extreme rates of inequality in our state and the whole country. So I think one thing we need to do is we need to work with teachers and parents, and we need to recruit more teachers of color for our schools, and we need to recruit more residents of Hartford to be teachers in our schools as well. And I think this is a long-term approach to building these relationships in the community that are going to let us, that are going to help our kids succeed. So those to me are starting places like you. I don't have every answer in my head. but I think we need to approach those things. We have an opportunity to get certification for paraprofessionals who do tend to be more likely to be folks of color as well as from the neighborhoods. And that's something I think we can work together with different communities on as far as education. So it's a good start.
Thank you very much for that answer. So I'm going to continue with this order, but I'll reverse it on the last two questions. So this next question will be for Brandon first. To prevent municipal bankruptcy, the city of Hartford accepted state oversight of its financial affairs in exchange for an infusion of state funds. What is your opinion of this solution? And as a state representative, what additional actions might you support to keep the city of Hartford fiscally stable?
So because it's an easy question, I kind of want to just elaborate a little bit on the last question. This past session, myself, along with Senator McCauley and others of the Black and Latino caucus, we worked on legislation around minority teacher recruitment. So I'm really happy that you brought that up, especially when you talk about young people, not only just in the city of Hartford, but throughout the state, wanting to see people that look like them teaching in their classroom. And that's extremely, extremely important to me, as well as many of my colleagues who are not Black and Puerto Rican as well. And they're fighting on behalf of many of the families throughout the state. So MTR, minority teacher recruitment, extremely important. With respect to the city of Hartford, we fought hard. I mean, we were kicked in the gut by some of our colleagues by simply asking for monies to save our city from filing bankruptcy. All right? We're talking about a city that is home, 2 minutes already, that's home to so many people, whether you live here or work here. You use our roads, you use our restaurant. I mean, you name it. Why not talk a little bit more about regionalism, about paying into supporting our city and making sure that we don't go under? And so it wasn't difficult for myself and my colleagues and others from other delegations to support this idea of let's make sure Hartford receives the $50 million or $50 million plus it was to help us to close that deficit. But that was just a small fix. There are other things that we have to look at in our city to figure out how to never end up where we have been for some years. I do give Luke Bronin and his team, give them credit for a lot of the work and keeping us abreast as to what's going on the local level. And meanwhile, we're fighting on the state level. But I don't have access to all of the books in the city of Hartford, but I think one of the things that we can do as a state delegation, as well as a city, your city councilman and woman and your mayor is working together so that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. And I think oftentimes, you know, we're working, we all have good intentions, but unfortunately sometimes we fall off the track. And so I think that right there in and of itself would allow for us to have greater impact when you talk about the state budget and helping our city. So there's my answer there.
Thank you.
So like you, I'm going to elaborate just a little bit on my last answer too. And the specific point that we talked about teachers of color, and I want to emphasize, I don't only think it's important in Hartford, I think our entire state and kids everywhere in our state should have access to teachers of color, because everyone, they can learn a lot from different. You can learn a lot from different people, and that's really important. It's not just important in the city. As far as the state bailout, the city of Hartford, and we kind of need to think about this as residents here. We have been subsidizing this region and this state for a long time. The highway splits our neighborhoods apart. The state continues building parking lots in areas where we should be developing economic opportunities for residents here. We borrowed a lot of money that we didn't have to build a stadium for temporary jobs for people in Hartford, and there are not even that many of those. So I think we need to frame this very differently than we are. I don't think and I appreciate the work that the folks in the delegation are doing. I appreciate efforts to collaborate. I think we need a lot more collaboration among state and city officials. I think our Hartford delegation needs to be working to build power in the legislature. We have a representative in Hartford who is poised to become Speaker of the House soon. We also have a representative in my district who's been there for 22 years and has no significant leadership position. She has no chairmanship of a committee. She's not somebody who's introducing bills all the time that are trying to create economic development opportunities and trying to combat poverty in our district, and she's not here. So this is really a good example, right, of we need to have leaders in our city who get along with people well enough to get in the room where decisions are being made, right? We had, there's $4 million from the state that was just bonded to fix roads in Hartford. I bet everybody in this room could think of 5 roads out the top of their head that they would love to see fixed. That money went to an area in the West End and 2 parts of downtown because those parts of the city have representatives who are in the room and fighting for their constituents. And guess what? The 3rd District, Frog Hollow, Parkville, and Behind the Rocks, we need that type of representative too. We need that
leadership too. Don't sit down yet, guys. As I said, I would reverse the order now. And as a teacher of color, I'd like to hear what you guys are saying because I feel the same way about higher ed as well in our state. So my third question, gun violence is a major challenge in the city of Hartford. Finding effective solutions and implementing them to make a difference now and into the future. The city has responded by keeping recreation centers open longer hours and increasing police presence in neighborhoods. Are these good strategies for combating gun violence? What others would you propose? And as a state representative, how would you support those strategies?
I think, for one, I should just mention that I was honored to receive the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense Candidate distinction from a national organization that works to reduce gun violence. And there are particular populations that, deal especially with gun violence, especially the LGBT community. And that was a big factor in that endorsement is that we need to be protecting people from guns. Unfortunately, I think the gun debate, and Connecticut is a leader in gun control, which I think is good. Unfortunately, the debate, even in the advocacy community, is too often focused on things like bump stocks, or it's focused on should you need a permit to carry a gun in a state park, and they're not really focused on ground zero of where violence is happening, and they're not as focused on the kinds of violence that we see in our communities. In general, I'm honestly, I haven't heard from a lot of folks in my travels around the district that there is a significant increase in police presence. I think they're changing some shifts, but I think that alone is definitely not enough. And I'm not sure how much people are seeing that in their day-to-day. Again, the rec centers, if we have the resources to keep rec centers open 24 hours, I would support that. I think we should. We need a lot more than that. And we need folks who know what those issues are. I'm a community organizer at heart, and so pretty much every answer that I give is going to come back to we need to get people who are impacted by an issue, who know it and experience it, in a room together, listening to each other, and talk about what makes sense for them. So, there's folks who are impacted by violence, and sometimes you kind of feel isolated or you feel like you're alone. Organizing is a way that people can get together and make their voices heard better. So I think that's a really important component of the problem. I think the police are recruiting more police officers, and I think, again, we need to be making efforts to recruit police officers who live in Hartford, preferably who grew up in Hartford, and who understand the community and understand different needs that folks have. We need police officers who know where the sidewalk is broken on the street and who usually hangs out at a certain corner and who doesn't. And these are kind of little things. Again, I'm not going to pretend that I know every way to solve these issues in Hartford, but I think the place that we start is we get people together who are focused on it and who are impacted by this issue and listen to their stories of how we can do better. And I will work at the state capitol because I think that, again, the gun debate is just completely not in the space that really is addressing Hartford's issues. And so for me, I would work to remind my colleagues from outside of the city on a regular basis that bump stocks are not as big of a concern on day-to-day gun violence. Most gun violence is by suicide, and most of it does not happen in school shootings. So we need to be addressing what's going on here, and I would work to remind people of those issues as well.
Repeat the question. Okay. Okay. Gun violence is a major challenge in the city of Hartford. Finding effective solutions and implementing them to make a difference now and into the future. The city has responded by keeping recreation centers open, longer hours, and increasing police presence in neighborhoods. Are these good strategies for combating gun violence? What others would you propose? And as a state representative, how would you support these strategies?
Awesome. Thank you. So just to answer the latter, and then I'll start at the top. Many of the members of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, some years ago, you all remember Sandy Hook, and I sort of still get a little choked up when we talk about it. Sandy Hook presented a challenge for many of our suburban school districts, but it was a little different when you talked a little bit about what was happening in our urban centers. And so our advocacy, when we were going through negotiations around budget, was how can we get more money to support many of the organizations that are providing support to young people in the urban centers to help deter them from making bad decisions. We successfully secured hundreds and thousands of dollars for organizations in the city of Hartford as well as the town of Windsor with respect to providing grants to organizations that we identified that provided support to young people in many of these areas that we're talking about. So when you talk about strategy, you talk about organizations, collaboration is key, and I think we all know that. With limited money, we got to figure out how to talk to each other. So I'm going to rattle off some names of organizations because these are the organizations I believe represent what collaboration is all about. We have the faith-based initiative right here in our city. We have Blue Hill Civic, Capital Workforce Partner, our piece of the pie, you name it. They're out there working alongside many of these young people that are so-called our bad kids, but helping them to make the right decisions. We need more money. We need more money to keep the centers open. I was there at that conversation when the mayor called everybody together and said, what can we do? We all said, can we go back to what we used to do? Because it actually worked. I remember going to Willie Ware Park, working there during the summer, going over to Parker Memorial, swimming, and going back home when the lights came on. It's just a different generation, but I think we have to have more of these robust conversations around how we can address the issue around gun violence, but also hearing from our young people. They don't want to hear from us. They want to hear from each other, but help to guide the conversation so that it is productive and result-driven. So we can talk about money all the time. We can talk about it until we're blue in the face. But if we're not talking about jobs for the parents of these young people, jobs for the parents of these young people, school opportunities for these young people, you'll continue to find a lot of our young people resorting to gun or violence. So again, another one of these issues that we have to continue to talk about, but also come with real-time solutions so that we can address this systemic issue.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go with Gannon this time for the next question. Yep, so we'll just, give her a chance to answer the question first, right? Okay. So this is the final big question from me. Connecticut and Hartford are facing a number of transportation challenges, such as the need for replacement of the I-84 overpass and its effect on adjacent neighborhoods, increasing pedestrian and bicycle use of city and town roads, and the possible eastward expansion of fast track. What ideas do you have for addressing these transportation challenges?
Well, I guess this is a good time to say that I have a new position where I'm working with Transport Hartford in order to make streets in Hartford safer for pedestrians and cyclists. That's through the Center for Latino Progress and working with some amazing young people who are collecting data around street safety in Hartford, and they have jobs because of Capital Workforce Partners, and we're working with some of the organizations that you listed, and that work is so important because youth are seeing what's happening in their neighborhood. They're seeing that their own knowledge is valuable, that they can contribute to the solution, that they can combine data with their anecdotal experience, and they can make change based on those things. And I think that's really powerful to see. So from transportation, I think, Hartford has an incredibly rich history as a bicycle and actually electric car, right, manufacturing center, where some of the biggest bicycle manufacturer in the world was here for a number of years. And we need to be making infrastructure decisions and planning decisions that are thinking about multimodal transportation, that are thinking about the convenience of getting off the bus and catching a transfer, having bike lanes that are safe for cyclists to ride so that they're not getting doored by cars. And of course, pedestrians, right? In our neighborhoods, 43% of people in Frog Hollow don't own a car. Folks in Clay Arsenal, about 50% don't own a car. Some of these corridors are some of the highest traffic and highest accident spots in the city. And the people who are getting hit by cars don't own cars. So we need to think about transportation that reduces car and highway use. I am sort of seeing plans for the 84 corridor. None of them is like blowing me away, I guess. But I think, what we want to try to do is minimize the impact of the highway and make it safe for pedestrians and cyclists to get around. And I think we should be I've been encouraged that in new developments, I learned at the Frog Hollow NRC meeting last week or month. There's a lot of time going by quickly for me. But there's an ordinance in Hartford where new apartment buildings, new constructions don't need to have parking lots with them. We need to be doing a lot higher density development and making sure that people have alternate modes for transportation. Again, the state government needs to stop building parking lots in downtown. And I think all of us need to get behind where that's happening in our neighborhood, get involved in local meetings, and give your feedback because, sometimes there's folks at these meetings that they might be an expert in transportation, but they're not familiar with the ATV enterprise that goes on in Hartford streets, right? We need to have folks that are involved in these discussions who know our neighborhoods. And that's the approach that I would take to transportation.
Thank you.
So we have a failing infrastructure when you're talking about transportation. You talk about the 84 viaduct. We already know. I mean, we need to visit tolls. We need to talk about all of that. All of that is all good. But I'm going to come from my district perspective when you talk about transportation. So while I'm a fan of, what is the little bus that goes from Central Connecticut State? Fast Track. I'm a little jaded when we talk about Fast Track because Fast Track didn't come Northeast, okay? And we talk about a lot of young people who actually work at the airport and they're working these jobs and they don't have a car, and Fast Track never came along my way. And so every time I am involved in a transportation meeting or any meetings when we're talking about transportation that betters our community, bring us together, I'm kicking, yelling, and screaming about why weren't we included. I'm sure there are studies. I'm sure money is a part of the conversation. But it's important that we talk about these communities that have been forgotten, okay? And so, sure, transportation is important. And I respect your game. You're an expert in that area, so everything you said, I echo. But if we ever are going to have thriving communities, you have to address the physical, when you talk about businesses, you talk about the blight, you talk about, where we're putting some of these small businesses and making sure people are getting off the highway to patronize their business. Everything really starts on the local level when we're talking about zoning and planning and making sure our communities are in a position to thrive. So education is important. for Little Old Capon Street or Tower Avenue, going on out to Windsor and Wilson, where you have all of these businesses that are literally thriving. But unfortunately, there's a transportation issue. And very few people are getting inside the district to patronize these stores and to keep them in business. So sure, the question is transportation, but it's one big question that we have to respond to. And you can't just look at transportation singularly, but you have to look at it from a macro level so that we can address many of the systemic issues.
Thank you. So hold on to the mic for a second, right? So what I've got are what I like to call 3 rapid fire questions that will basically call for you. Man, why did we think of that earlier?
I don't know,
mics,
man. You needed me.
Because we're collaborators, that's why. We're sharing.
Nobody saw that. No one saw that. No one saw that. So these are for me sort of rapid fire questions and really yes or no questions. I have a sense I already got a sense of one answer to this question, but I'll ask 3 real quick questions and go back and forth, and we'll start with Gannon. Do you No, just a yes or no question, and then we're going to go to the audience. So, do you favor the legalization of marijuana in Connecticut?
Yes.
Yes. However.
Rapid fire.
No, ain't no rapid fire. You got too many cameras around here. It is important that, number one, we move beyond just the financial revenue component of the conversation. But for me, I have to have a conversation, a continued dialogue to educate my community on this idea of legalizing marijuana, similar to the package store conversation. When you talk about package stores at the corner, many people think, hold on before y'all clap, because y'all may not agree with me. Many people believe that package stores had everything to do with the demise of our communities. And when you really think about it, you can go down the street to West Hartford and there's a package store, a winery, excuse me, on every corner, and everybody's doing just fine. So it's a much larger conversation when you're talking about merely just, let's legalize marijuana. No, we need to further discuss this, which is why it's not been so easy to pass it. I'm on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. I'm the vice chairman. It's a difficult conversation. Difficult. We see the ching-ching. We see the money and the benefits in other states that have done a wonderful job. But we need to provide awareness to everybody in this room and in our communities. All right? So yes, right. But with my response added.
That was a long yes.
Hey.
Okay, all right.
17 S's going to yes.
Okay, second question, and this may get a long yes or no as well.
All my yeses
Do you
are long.
approve of installing electronic tolls on Connecticut's highways?
Yes.
Yes.
I can say however, but yes, I do.
Long answer, short answer, yes, just yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Final one. Do you favor increasing taxes on top earners in Connecticut?
Yes.
Yes, we need progressive taxation in Connecticut.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to turn this over to the audience, and I'm going to put something out there first. Be nice to me, right? If I forget that you raised your hand, don't get mad at me. Get mad at Richard and everyone else, right? Remember that. I'm not the enemy here, okay? So I'm going to try to remember who raises their hand and when they raise their hand. So the first thing we're going to do, probably for about 15 minutes, we're going to allow people to ask questions. And in this set of questions, ask a question that both candidates could answer, right? And then we're going to go to some district-specific questions afterwards. But let's start first with just questions that we can ask both of the candidates. So who would like to answer a question? Okay, you're 1, you're 2, you're 3, you're 4, you're 5. Remember your number. Don't get mad at me if you forgot your number, right? And everybody else, you remembered their numbers for them, too. Richard's going to float around with the mic. And I'm not going to remember that. But they're going to remember that order. And they're going to help me. Oh, we got another one. What number was I on? 6? So this will be 6, so there'll be 7 in the back?
6.
6, all right. So let's go at number 1. About 2 minutes for the responses. 2 minutes, okay.
When we talk about how generous the state was in our giving Hartford its bailout, we never talk about the fact that in the past 8 years, the state has never paid the pilot in full.
You're right.
And that the state owes Hartford about $734 million. And if they paid that, they wouldn't have to bail us out. You say what to that?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think we need you to come to the Capitol and share that testimony with folks who are making decisions up there. We need a lot more people saying those types of things in that building, and that's what our campaign is about, because you're absolutely right. When I said the city of Hartford is subsidizing the state of Connecticut, that's exactly what we're doing it, and we're doing it in a million ways. They've been underfunding that pilot. They're not distributing education cost sharing in an equitable way, and as we see a result, we have some of the greatest inequality in our state. I think it's absolutely imperative that we, both advocate and fight and show them those numbers and make that opinion known in the Capitol. But it's also important to have a representative, especially in my district, which has some of the most amazing gems and features of our city: Real Artways, Hands-on Hartford, Hog River Brewing. There's amazing economic development happening along Capitol Avenue. There's so many, Parkville School and the community center there. There's so many different spots of our district that are so wonderful and welcoming. And I think a lot of it is just getting people out of that building, off the highway, and going to Red Rock for lunch, or going somewhere in the district, going to a show at Real Artways or somewhere else, and just getting that experience of Hartford in a different way. I think we need political leaders who are inviting people to do that, and not just legislators, but people from other districts. We need to be inviting them to come into our city, as warm and welcoming as we are, and showing them what we have. I think you're absolutely right about pilot, and I grew up here. I've lived away for a few years, but some of these things that you're talking about, whether it's legalization of marijuana, whether it's healthcare access, whether it's tolls, whether it's education cost sharing or pilot, these are things that have been getting debated in this legislature for years and years and years, and it's time for us to make a change.
So just to be sure that you all are clear, and my time is not up, right, Linda? All right, cool. We'll just ignore it. But Denise is always up there. She's always up there talking about fully funding our pilot. Unfortunately, it's never been fully funded, and that goes for the entire state. Is it right? No, because many of our municipalities, they depend on that funding. And so, which is why we are in conversations around, do we get rid of it? I don't know, right? Let's talk a little bit about education cost sharing, ECS, and really figuring out what's the new formula that will be equitable for those most needy districts versus districts down in, Fairfield County getting all this money and they don't necessarily even need it, right? But there's no formula. And if you all remember, there was a Supreme Court case that said, hey, we don't know what to do, so you, state legislature, you need to figure it out. And we're still in that predicament right now as we speak. And it's not good, because many of our children are still falling through the cracks because we're having this long debate on how to educate, or fund rather, our education system. So I agree with you. It needs to be fully funded. And sure, we wouldn't have had to ask for money if it was, right? And so we can spend probably a few more hours talking about ECS to get everybody's mind wrapped around it, as well as pilot. So I'll just leave it at that. I agree with you. We're still working on it, and I'm sure you'll be back up next session if voted back in, and you'll be yelling and kicking and screaming at us again. So we look forward to it, Denise.
Number 2.
So this should be an easy question, but I've been living in the 3rd district for about 10 years, and in that time I've reached out to the rep a number of times, have never gotten a single response, not even a form letter. So the questions for both of you, for Brandon, like how do you respond to your constituents, and how might you be changing that in the future? And again, just simply, how do you plan to communicate with people who have concerns and questions in the district? Thank you.
Sure. And that's a great question, especially when you're talking about civic engagement. You're talking about a time in this Trump era where you really want people to be fully engaged in the political process. So a few things that I do, some of the basics. In addition to holding town hall meetings, coffees, coming up to the office, I send regular emails out to folks through my email blast, just providing awareness. Social media is a huge asset in this generation when you're sharing information, but simply being present in the community and making sure you respond back to emails. We have smartphones now, so I don't need to be at my desk and having to wait for your email to come through. I can send you that response. Every year for about 3 years now, I've hosted a forum called The Forum, and it's a nonpartisan opportunity for people to come in and learn about the political process. Every year it's at Trinity College. This is shameless plug. Y'all come on out. And it's an opportunity for you to learn about what's happening not only in the city of Hartford or the town of Windsor, state of Connecticut, but in this country. And how do we get more people involved? What can I do better is your question. I think the last part of it is not forgetting about our elderly. Not all of them are on Facebook. Not all of them have a smartphone, and they still use a regular, pick up the phone and call them. Which is why, for me now, door knocking more than ever, and sitting down at a kitchen table and talking to many of our seniors about what's happening in their life. I think I'm a millennial, but I think I missed that mark. So, I have to really stay true to grassroots politics and really connecting with people where they are, especially our young people as well.
I appreciate the question, Carrie, and thanks for being here. My experience mostly in the couple of months I've been becoming a politician has been knocking on doors. And in that, it's such an amazing experience. If you've never done it, I really encourage folks to do it. And a number of people have said something to me to the effect of, well, politicians come around when they need votes, but they really don't show up after that. And my approach to that is, well, how do you know if you're doing a good job if you're not talking to the people who voted for you to be in that role? And I think there are a number of, the city of Hartford, our school system, there are a lot of hardworking people, but we have some communication challenges where there's a lot of times when important meetings get scheduled and people don't know about it, or it was put on the radar at the last minute, or it was publicized. Tonight, in fact, there's Mayor Bronin is at a forum somewhere, in the North End. He's missing this forum. You guys are missing where he is. There's a lot of these types of things. And to your point about seniors, I think going door to door is an amazing way to connect with people and to learn what their issues are. It's something that if I get elected, I'm going to continue to do it, and I'm going to invite folks who have concerns in the community to come with me, and to talk to their neighbors about what's going on. Because when we're talking about housing issues and fair housing in the city of Hartford, there's been a slight decrease in some neighborhoods in home ownership in our district, but the levels of poverty have increased over the last 20 years. People have less access to more expensive housing, and they don't have job opportunities. They don't have increased salaries. These are things that when you're dealing with a slumlord in your own apartment, it seems impossible to fight a company that has millions of dollars, that has, special favors from City Hall, that has, all these resources, right? But when you get together with your neighbors and you see community organizing taking place, you guys remember when Hart was out here bringing rats to people's desks at the housing department, because people need to organize and get it together. And so that's the approach that I would take to keeping in touch with constituents. I also have a Facebook page I hope everybody follows, and I hope eventually to have a sophisticated email operation at some point too. But all of these things, I'm pretty available. My information's on my walk card, and I would just encourage that conversation to keep going.
Thank you. Who was number 3? Okay, he's got the mic. He's right behind you. This is great. Everybody remembers their number. This is great.
This is a question on criminal justice reform. It's kind of a two-part because it's more so for Brandon, but I got to include you, Gannon.
Thank you.
I read somewhere, well, I've been researching you, Brandon, in regards to the criminal justice reform, and I saw that you helped support a bill that just been recently passed in the House in regards to affordable housing for formerly incarcerated individuals. I just wanted more clarification on the housing options that fall underneath that bill. And Gannon, when you talk about fair housing, where's your stance when it comes to formerly incarcerated individuals getting affordable housing?
Thank you. Great question. Actually, the bill that I passed with the help of all of my colleagues in the House and the Senate was basically as a result of a study on the criminal justice system and probably conducting well over 35 to maybe 40 interviews with various stakeholders to help me come up with where are we in the state of Connecticut when you talk about the formerly incarcerated returning home. Housing stood out, job opportunities stood out, healthcare stood out, and then there were several others. To answer your question, it was a study on housing options in the state of Connecticut. So, great question. Tomorrow, we're having our first meeting with the Hartford Housing Authority, State Department on Housing. They'll be there. You have our Greater Hartford Reentry Council. They'll be there, and many other stakeholders to talk through where are we in the state of Connecticut when you talk about housing for individuals returning home. And it's open to the public. And now 10 o'clock tomorrow, room 1B at the Legislative Office building. And we're charged with figuring out, number one, policy recommendations, but number two, how much will it take to provide these options to housing authorities that have their own authority on how they allow people to move in these housing authorities, et cetera. And so there's a lot of work to be done when you talk about it. But you talk about the Reagan era and you talk about what happened with many of our families. This was a federal issue. When many males could not return home because of their background. And you saw many of our families literally being separated for generations. And so, I'm really proud that Connecticut is ahead of the curve when you talk about criminal justice reform. So we can talk more offline about it.
So I really appreciate the question. And in talking to folks, running lists and knocking on doors, talking to voters, you notice that there's a lot of gaps every block you go. And some places you knock on an apartment building and there's maybe one person who votes in that building. And you say, why is that? Our district, the 3rd district, we have a voting is incredibly important, and I'm grateful for this forum, and I'm grateful for all of you being here. I'm grateful for all the folks I've met in my district at the door and who are supporting our campaign. But we have to get beyond voting as an organizing model in communities where there are large concentrations of people who have been incarcerated, where there are large concentrations of people who may have come from somewhere else, and where there are large concentrations of kids, because voting isn't a path to change for them. And so we need to address this very differently. We talk about this all the time. And I think one of the most important things, housing is fundamental, right? But any decision, whether it, regardless of who you are in society, where you've been or how well you're doing, if all of your neighbors don't have access to basic needs, your whole neighborhood is going to be struggling. And that's true for our city as well. If our city doesn't have basic functioning, society, that bleeds out into the rest of the state of Connecticut as well. And that's the case that as political leaders, we're really charged with making to everybody else on the floor. So affordable housing, fair housing, there's a lot of ways to look at it. What I would say is that over the last 20 years, it's become less available in our community where I live in Frog Hollow. I rent an apartment from a large company just like everybody else. And so it's an issue that's near and dear to me. And it's something that I think, no matter where you come from or where you've been, you're still going to school, you're still living in, you're still living in the neighborhood, you still need a job, you still need health care, and if we shut people out of that conversation, our whole society isn't gonna work right. So it's an issue that I'm definitely gonna be championing for in the legislature if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you. Who was number 4? Who was my number 4 over here?
In the interest of full disclosure, I want to thank AccessTV.org for making this live for all of us in the greater Hartford area and throughout to see this. It's because of that I actually decided to come down and actually bring my son with me to see the debate. Having said that, my concern is really with understanding what our role is as citizens as we watch the advent, if you will, of new technology. There is cryptocurrency out there, Bitcoin, and you have blockchain and those kinds of things that are raising money at record numbers. And that money, in large part, is being raised in Connecticut. And it's because of hedge funds and venture capitalists and private equity funds that that kind of money is being raised to actually invest in new technology. But that new technology, if you will, we're not participating in large part. We're left out. They are using our money. They're using pension funds. They're using tax credits. They're using a number of financial instruments and tools to actually create greater opportunity for themselves. So my concern is that if we don't understand that the people who are doing that are owning or will own us and will own the new technology, then we will continue to all of us, for all intents and purposes, live in a state of permanent servitude. So my question is are we aware? And if we are not aware, why are we not aware? And what we're doing to be a part of the success of these companies that are using our dollars to create greater and better technology when you go into the very fundamental places that your supermarket lines are closing down. You know, the people in those places don't have those jobs anymore because they've been replaced.
So let's give them an opportunity to answer the question.
Sir, would you be able to summarize your question a little bit for me of what you're asking?
Well, the question is, are you aware that that's taking place? Are you aware? And if you are aware, what do you intend to do about us being able to participate in the success of those companies who are using our dollars in order for them to invest in the success of those companies?
I mean, I think generally speaking, what I'm hearing you talk about is a few things. We're talking about progressive taxation, and certainly in a state like Connecticut, where we have a lot of hedge fund millionaires and billionaires, we need to make sure that people are paying their fair share. I think that's important. You're talking about media consolidation. You're not. I guess I'm not entirely understanding your question. I guess so. I guess I can talk a little bit about these things that I think are important. But media consolidation is definitely an issue in our society. And if you're looking at companies like Facebook that are making millions of dollars and they're not following the same laws that that journalists are required to follow, that's a big issue. In our campaign, we've reached out to a lot of community newspapers and community sources of information, and I think that's really important in local races to make sure that you're in touch with people. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not totally understanding your question. I
So
don't know if somebody else
one
wants
of
to
the things I would
summarize it a
suggest,
little bit.
maybe, right,
One time, I won't take any more of your time.
because we got a couple more questions. I'm going to make sure I get them.
Right.
I'll get them in. So.
Well, I'll sit down.
Well, I
maybe
just
when-
I just
yeah,
wanted to
maybe
respond.
Brandon, give it a shot at it, yeah.
I don't necessarily. This is a smart brother here, so anytime I sit with him, I got to bring a pen and a piece of paper. But I hear your question. I'm sure there are businesses out there that are doing exactly what you're talking about. Unfortunately, I'm not abreast and familiar with the names of these companies. However, I think it's important that we need to talk about, all of our jobs being phased out by these major companies who are coming in and saying, look, we can use this tech gadget to replace you. And I'm not against it. Technology is important. However, having jobs for individuals are important as well, right? And so I'd love to learn more, hear what you're saying, perhaps even connect with the technology committee and convene a group of people to really talk through the impact of what you're talking about that has on our state and even our country.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Who was number 5? So back over there, Richard. And then I think 6 was in the back.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I was watching CTN the other night because I don't really have a life. And I was watching the Republican debate, the governor debate, and they trashed Connecticut, okay? They trashed it for the last 15 years and threw out all the economic stats that are terrible, okay? Including the $500 million that the state is paying the city of Hartford. The news in Connecticut on the economic side is terrible. People are leaving Connecticut. So my question to you here tonight, I'm going to dovetail on this man for a minute. What is your strategy to bring jobs? Because jobs will rise the boat and help everybody. Without a job, what are you doing? So what is your strategy to turn the tide for the current economic state of Connecticut, and what is your job strategy?
So I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with you respectfully on, people leaving the state of Connecticut. I'm still interested to learn more about the statistics and how you come up with all of the folks that are leaving the state of Connecticut, even the most wealthy. Okay? Connecticut is an absolute amazing place to live, but we have our own problems as a family, like many of you do. Right? Right? Wake up, just want to make sure you're there. But it is our responsibility to make sure that this state is attractive for businesses to come. And we've not always been business friendly. We literally tax people to the point where they either shut their business down or they're changing to try to do something else to stay alive. So I'm going to bring it back down to the district level. What I've been working on is figuring out how do we identify companies that are innovative, nimble, they want to come in and they have a social sort of justice component to help communities address food disparities, jobs for young people, vocational opportunities. Those are the type of opportunities that I'm looking for neighborhoods like Hartford and Town of Windsor. And I'm not just talking about, picking some tobacco like we did back in the day, my mom and them, right? Some of you raise your hand, y'all been out there, y'all know. We're talking about opportunities for young people that are saying, look, I want to remain in the state of Connecticut, but y'all got to come up a little bit and meet me where I am, and making sure that these opportunities, work opportunities, are meaningful wages, and then secondly, livable too. Meaningful, $15 an hour and more, right? But I'm also talking about those opportunities that will attract young people that want to stay in our city, and in my case, the town of Windsor as well. So there's a major plan from the state level, but I think it's important that we have to talk about our local level as well with respect to economic development and how to keep our communities thriving.
I think maybe part of what you're talking about is on automation. And and, transitioning jobs that used to be done by people to be done by machines. I think this is a large concern across our national economy, and it's something that's definitely impacted a place like Hartford. In my district, Hartford has lost about 30,000 manufacturing jobs in about 25 years. And by 1990, they're all gone. Frog Hollow has been a neighborhood where historically, for over 100 years, people have lived there who did not necessarily have a high education level, were not necessarily speaking English in their home, but they've come from places, they had a place that they could afford to live, and they had a job that they could get to. The two of the biggest obstacles to jobs are childcare and transportation. And so when we look at companies like GE, I would look very closely at this as a state legislator. Did GE leave because, their taxes went up? Maybe that was part of it. Maybe it was the fact that the public transportation infrastructure in Connecticut is not there. It's not adequate. They moved to a place that has incredible public transportation, right? That's a huge deal. The infrastructure, the money that we could get from tolls. Our legislature is still debating about tolls as if the debate was 20 years ago when the technology has completely changed. We need to get past these old discussions and start looking at ways that we can make long-term investments in our state. To the last, as far as the long term, it's nice to hear that you went to Prince Tech. I talked to a mom a few months ago whose daughter goes to Prince Tech, and she's concerned about the educational opportunities there. We have so many companies. We have the Center for Connecticut Advanced Technology right across the river. There's so many companies that are based there. You're looking for them. There's a lot of innovation and also social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, where people are getting jobs that are not just about the bottom line, but it's about growing skills in the long term. And as a state legislator, I would be fighting for a huge increase in youth employment opportunities and in real positions that can connect youth, as we're doing now. We have interns who are looking at traffic. We want to connect them to planning jobs. We want them to be planners in the city of Hartford. We want them to be working at these architecture firms, in the future. So I think we need to make those long-term investments in jobs as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Just if I could offer one thing I think is also important is the investment we make in our, aside from K through 12, but I think our technical schools and also higher education.
Free community college.
So when you think about why GE left, I think our higher education system is part of the problem as well. So I think we had a question in the back. Who was our last? Number 6, right? In the back. Raise your hand. To your seat. Yep.
All right, thank you. Question for both of you. Why do you want to run for this position, and where do you see the opportunity?
So for me, I'm working on my 4th term. I started off being interested in politics. Like any other child, you want to be the first of something. I wanted to be the first black president, but I think President Obama beat me to the punch. And then, when you talk about our history, I remember being at Annie Fisher reading about mayors Thurman Milner and Carrie Saxon Perry, and always wanted to be like them. And it wasn't until I was of age and I understood that education is the reason why I'm here today. I remember going throughout school having substitute teachers and being behind and taking remedial classes when I went off to college at Alabama State University. And I never wanted a young person to experience what I experienced attending many of the schools in our city. Loving teachers, but it was just a circumstance. So I'm here because I really care about education. And it just morphed into criminal justice reform, all out of my own personal experiences from my father being incarcerated, family members, et cetera, being from North Hartford and wanting to see a change. Interested in politics, and I thought I could use my passion combined with policy making and to really make a change. And so I would love to return back to complete another term and to continue working on the work that I've worked on these past 5.5 years.
It's a great question, and I love that you asked it, because that suggests to me that you're thinking about running for office, and I would encourage you to do that. It's an amazing experience, and hopefully you're thinking about that. But I love that you're engaged in the process. For me, it's a few things. No, I'm from Hartford. I love the city. I think anybody who's known me a long time, I have probably 10 T-shirts from Hartford High. I'm very invested in the city, and it's just been my home. I've lived in other places. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in Washington. I've lived in Boston. But there's really no place like home. And so for me, I love Hartford, and I want to see our city thrive. For the last 22 years in the district that I live in, we've had a representative who I think we need a change. I think we need a new style. We need people who are actively seeking input from their constituents, to your question, and who are really listening to a lot of different voices, whether they're voters or not, whether they're supporters or not. We're bringing people together from across the city. And I think one of the things that I really think about in this, and we talked about teachers, we talked about neighborhood schools. I moved away from Hartford and I came back. And in coming back, I reconnected with a number of people that I had known over the years. I've got an amazing, Miss Yenny's in the audience. I've known her since high school, where she brought us oranges at Hartford High. I got a note from a teacher that I'd had many years ago. Even applying to business school, a friend of mine from elementary school wrote me a recommendation for UConn MBA program, which thankfully was successful. So I guess my answer is really, those are the connections that drew me back here. And I want kids that are living in my neighborhood today to have those same opportunities to be growing up in a diverse and welcoming environment the way that I was raised in this city. I want kids to have those same opportunities no matter where they come from. And I don't think that we're doing as well as we could right now. So my approach is a different approach, and I hope that folks will respond to it. So far, they seem to be. So that's really what drives my run for office.
Thank you. So now it's about 7:15, and we want to save about couple minutes towards the end before 7:30 to have some closing statements. But are there specific questions that anyone wants to address to a specific candidate who's on the stage? If you do, raise your hand so I can see it. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and I think that's about all we may have time for.
Okay, so I'm Hyacinth. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. One of my things that, that I would love to see someone champion is more, trade school within our high school. Because we know a lot of our kids are not going to college. A lot of them cannot get into Prince Tech. But how do we create those trade school within these 3 high schools that we have, so these young people have an access when they leave school? At least they'll have a trade and can get into the workforce. Can any of you feel like you can champion that at the state level?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really important need. There are a lot of jobs where you have good benefits, you have a good salary track, plumbers, electricians, all of these positions, and they can provide economic security for somebody without necessarily having to go to college. I think there's a lot of merit in what you're saying, and I think one step might be to sit down with some of these companies, because I think there really is a tie between, you read in the paper at the same time, there's these technology companies that can't find enough employees, and then we're in a city where we have folks that need jobs. So we got to put our hands together on this one. We got to get folks involved in the education system earlier in the technical schools. I was reading a little bit last night about Rawson School, which is a lighthouse school that's been adopted by a few different organizations in the community. And they're really working with, and you know a lot more about this, I'm sure, but they're really working with different leaders in the community of what are the jobs that are going to be necessary. So whether it's through public schools, whether it's through tech schools, whether it's through job training programs that are, outside benefits for students. I think there's a lot to be said for paying students to learn things, especially outside of the school, but I think you can learn a lot in an employment opportunity that you may not learn in a traditional classroom. So I would be advocating for organizations that are doing that work. I'm new to the lawmaker process and being a lawmaker, but I would first seek to just learn from folks that are doing that, listen to business leaders and people who are creating jobs about what they need, and how do we create those connections to our tech schools and to our traditional high schools in Hartford. I think that's a good place to start.
have something you want to say? Sure. Hyacinth, it's a great question. I think the infrastructure is there. I think you just need some willing minds that would come in and leadership to really make that happen. But just to respond quickly, SDE would be a great partner. Our local school board officials, the city, and even community members to be in the room to talk about how do we enhance our curriculum to meet the needs of those young people in our community when you talk about vocational opportunities. You're right, not every student is going to have access to Prince Tech or Vinyl Tech or any of our tech schools, but how do we incorporate? And I think we had it back in the day. They had it in high school. I remember my aunt, she's a teacher at Hartford High, and she would always talk about it. So I think we really do need to get back to the basics, if you ask me, but you have to bring those partners, as you said, in the room, namely SDE, your local boards of education, and other community stakeholders to inform the enhancement of the curriculum. Thank you. I think that was the second one, and then we had the third one over there.
My question is...
I like that T-shirt. Sorry.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. My question is for Brandon, and it's more so specifically about gun violence. Mm-hmm. So just to give you guys a bit background about myself, I recently lost my brother due to gun violence. And just to elaborate on the question that was mentioned by the moderator, how will you guys... what other type of implementations will be placed to limit the gun violence that takes place in your district? And Gannon, feel free to chime in as well, because I see this as an ongoing issue and I want it to come to an end. Yeah. And also, this question is kind of two-tier. I'd like you guys to tell me what issues need to be addressed within the youth or my generation specifically within the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, I'll respond quickly, and I'll start off with, first of all, my condolences on your brother, in that situation. And I'm not even going to repeat myself in terms of, the response I gave earlier around, what can I do as an elected official to address gun violence in our community? You said it best. We need ongoing conversation with many voices in the room that will then help to inform policy. But I would take it a step further. We need to talk about mental health. Our young people are traumatized. You talk about people who go off to war and they come back home. They experience, what do you call that? What's the correct terminology? PS. It's there, and our young people are walking around with it on a daily basis without having the right support. So that's one. And then two, education is huge. Housing. We got a lot of young people that are like homeless and they're couch surfing, like literally staying at this cousin's house, that sister's house. And we really need to figure out how do we work with many of these entities and organizations that are doing a phenomenal job, but they need more help. And sometimes it may not even be money, which it really is, but it's also the coordination of a lot of the services that are needed by many of these young people. So I'm sorry I don't have a right answer for you, but I think we do need, with your leadership as well, how do we continue this dialogue, but come up with some real, tangible, result-driven type ideas that will help to combat youth violence in the city of Hartford and even in our suburban towns as well.
And I'm really sorry to hear about your brother as well. Thank you for sharing that. And I think exactly as Representative McGee is saying, it is your story and it is your voice that really has the chance to make the most difference. My sense is that the debate around guns doesn't focus as much on, in the legislature in Connecticut, doesn't focus as much on stories like yours. But the point that you're making around our young people is absolutely right, and it's something that I think for our generation, I'm 35, it's hard for me to imagine going to school and dealing with an active shooter drill or dealing with hiding in a closet. It's a fear that kids today are growing up with, that in all kinds of communities, that I think for everyone over a certain age, we need to really take stock of what we're doing because you're absolutely right. There is incredible trauma that's associated with, all kinds of experiences that kids have way too often and way too young. And unfortunately, this is a situation where entrenched endemic poverty impacts gun violence. When resources are scarce, people are stressed, and that leads to more crime and violence. And so if we're going to talk about gun violence, we can talk about getting guns out of criminals' hands, we can talk about restrictions, but we need to be talking about investments in our community that grow the economy from the bottom up and that involve dealing with directly with the issues of poverty. We need jobs that people can get to. We need, places for their kids to be safe while they're at their jobs. And as we've been talking about, we need more opportunities for our youth. Keeping the rec centers open late, good start. We need a lot more lifeguards. We need a lot more programming. We need a lot more resources, taking care of our parks, making sure that we have a lot more, sports leagues and opportunities. And I will also say, my mother is an art teacher. We need a lot more opportunities for our youth in the arts and in culture. I was recently at La Sala Femme on Farmington Avenue this weekend, an incredible artistic space and just free space. We need a lot more places like that where people can convene and be in community together.
Thank you. And as well. I think we had one more question here. If I'm going to get us out of here on time, and they invite me back to moderate again, maybe in the future, I'm going to have this be the last question before we go to the closing. And I know other people had their hands up, maybe to ask questions afterwards to talk to the candidates. So.
Okay. Well, on a county level, Hartford has been given a failing grade by the EPA in regards to its air quality. And it's left more than half of the children in this county susceptible to respiratory illness. And so, what my question to you, or questions, is: would you support the electrification of transportation in the city? And if so, what would you do what would you do to convert transportation, CT Transit, CT Fast Track to an entirely electric mode of model?
Thank you.
I guess my first question would be, where do we get the money from? But it's a great idea because you're talking about the quality of our health. And I thought you were going to go more toward like lead abatement and trash, burning of all the trash, like all of that stuff, right? I would love to talk with you specifically a little bit more on that idea. It sounds like a lot of money, but it sounds like something that we can begin the conversation. And I think they've already started it on the Transportation Committee. And because of the failing grade that we've received by the EPA. So unfortunately, I don't have a response for you on that particular question, but I would support it.
Yeah, I would want to learn a little bit more about those details too. It sounds like a really good goal. And I think, we want to start where we are right now. How can we look forward and build a coalition that can get us closer to that idea? As we've been talking about multimodal public transit, and just creating an infrastructure in our state where cyclists and people who are pedestrians do feel safe, where it is efficient to take public transit. My sense is that's kind of where we are in Hartford right now, is that we're working on those things. And as we make these infrastructure investments, that's kind of where we're starting, and we kind of need to keep that in mind of where we're trying to go. One thing that, and I would be interested if the state of Connecticut has looked at this or is thinking about this. One thing that President Obama did when he first got into office was he was trying to put the stimulus package together. And one of the first components of that stimulus package was that he wanted to retrofit federal buildings so that they would be more energy efficient. So it costs money in the short term, right, to invest and make those changes. And by the way, you were giving people jobs as you were doing that because you had to hire people to make those changes in the buildings. Once they were there, now you have an energy efficient building. So you put the upfront investment, but you get a lot of savings in return over time. That's the type of approach that I think the state of Connecticut could really stand to do more of. I realize elections are every 2 years, and people get nervous. It's like every other year there's a budget, and it feels like a surprise every year. No offense, sir, but it feels that way to us citizens a lot. I think we need to do a lot more long-term planning in the way that you're talking about. Whether it's converting this, if new vehicles purchased by the city have zero emissions, or we're gonna, anytime that a developer develops a building, it has to be LEED certified. These are some things I think we can definitely get people behind in the short term and try building that coalition for the longer term.
Right. Wow. Thank you. So I'm right on time almost. I think I'll be maybe a minute over. So Richard, I'd like to do this again if you don't mind. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to a closing statement, and we'll give about a minute-long closing statement from each candidate. And I'd like to first give both of them a great round of applause. This has been very good. Very good. Yeah. I've learned a lot myself, so why don't we start with Gannon? I think we start with Brandon at the very beginning, so we'll start with Gannon to give the closing statement.
Well, thank you guys all so much. Thank you for your excellent questions. Estaba esperando oír una pregunta en español esta noche, no la oí, pero gracias a ustedes por escuchar todo esto en otro caso. I was hoping to hear a question in Spanish. I didn't, but I do want to thank everybody for being here and for your questions and this conversation. It's been really great. Thank you for being so nice. This is my first time doing anything like this, and thank you so much, Mr. Sekou, as well. This election really is important. In Hartford, we've been talking about representation all night. In our district, almost around 90% of voters are Democrats. So this primary on August 14th, it really is the election. It's really the competitive election. And so, we have a choice. We have an incumbent who's been there for the last 22 years, where we've seen increases in rates of poverty. We have not seen great increases in educational outcomes. We've not seen a lot of jobs projects, the type that's coming to Homestead Avenue, $16 million investment. I'm thrilled that it's coming to Hartford. I'm thrilled it's coming to Homestead Avenue. But we need somebody, we have a lot of abandoned factories in our neighborhoods too, in the 3rd District. And we need somebody who's getting in that room, who's negotiating with those companies that are bringing green jobs to Hartford, and who's fighting to get those jobs in our district. So it really comes down to representation. I've been knocking on doors, I've been talking to voters, I've been at NRZ meetings, I'm at this forum tonight. There's a couple empty chairs up here, and I want to point that out again. Young man asked me in the back, thank you for why I'm in this race. It's because it's time for change. Our district deserves better, and this is our chance. This August 14th primary, this is our chance. So if you all have liked what we've said tonight, thank you for being here. We need your help. We have 2 weeks left, and we've got to talk to as many voters as we can if we're going to make a big change in Hartford this August 14th. So I appreciate everybody being here. I'll stick around after if folks have more questions. But thank you again. And to everybody I said thank you for at the beginning, thank you all again for all of your support as well. So thanks.
Thank you.
So I had to write my notes down so I could do it quick. Thank you, Dr. Bilal, for facilitating tonight's or moderating tonight's forum. The coalition members, thank you. Hartford Votes, thank you so much for putting these types of forums on. I got to shout out my man, Jay Stan McCauley, Access TV, thank you. And my team, a portion of them in the back and scattered throughout, thank you for your support and your help. And I have some folks from Windsor here as well, thank you. I don't know where, yeah. But I'll say this much. It is important that each of you come out on August 14th, Tuesday, August 14th, call your family members, call your friends, text them, offer a ride. But you must get everyone out to vote. That's number one. Those of you in the 5th Assembly District, and if you know anyone in Hartford, Northeast, or in Windsor, please encourage them to vote 3B for Brandon McGee. I'll say it again. 3B for Brandon McGee. And I will stick around and we can have conversations about get out to vote efforts. I kind of enjoyed being able to sit down for a little while and not have to walk doors and people offer me water because I'm sweating. But it's been an amazing journey, and it's always cool to reconnect with my constituency. So again, thank y'all for sitting here listening to us all night and not have the jazz of some other folks being here. But so glad to be here, and I look forward to speaking with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for a very informative evening. The last thing I want to say is that inside of the brochure, with my picture on the front, there is a evaluation form that you can fill out, and we would really like you to fill out the evaluation form to let us know how this went and to make some recommendations about how we could possibly make this even better. So once again, thank you to both of our candidates for their fine presentation. Great job.
Okay, my friends, that's it. That's our coverage of the candidates for state representative from the 3rd and the 5th districts. Brandon McGee representing the 5th. His challenger was not here. And Gannon Long challenging the 3rd, and her opponent was not here. So we will continue to bring you coverage to these types of events as they happen, and hope that you enjoyed this. And we'll see what we can do to keep you all informed, because, of course, elections matter, and we want you to be independent thinkers, but you can't be an independent thinker if you don't have information. And so enjoy your night. We'll see you next time.